if we can take that tangent briefly with DEI,
Yeah.
diversity, equity, and inclusion, what is the good and what is the harm of such programs?
DEI, I know people who are DEI consultants. Actually, I have a dear friend who I love very much who does DEI. Absolutely decent people. What they want to do is create bonds of understanding, friendship, compassion among people who are different. Unfortunately, the research on what a lot of DEI actually does is oftentimes the opposite of that. And I think that it's partially a problem with some of the ideology that comes from critical race theory, which is a real thing, by the way, that informs a lot of DEI, that actually makes it something more likely to divide than unite. Well, we talk about this in Coddling in the American Mind as the difference between common humanity identity politics and common enemy identity politics. And I think that I know some of the people that I know who do DEI, they really want it to be common humanity identity politics, but some of the actual ideological assumptions that are baked in can actually cause people to feel more alienated from each other. Now, when I started at FIRE, my first cases involved 9/11. And it was bad. Professors were getting targeted. Professors were losing their jobs for saying insensitive things about 9/11, and both from the right and the left. Actually, in that case, actually sometimes a lot more from the right. And it was really bad, and about 5 professors lost their jobs. That's bad. 5 professors over a relatively short period of time being fired for a political opinion. That's something that would get written up in any previous decades. We're now evaluating how many professors have been targeted for cancellation between 2014 and middle of this year, July of 2023. We're at about well over 1,000 attempts to get professors fired or punished, usually driven by students and administrators, often driven by professors, unfortunately, as well. About 2/3 of those result in the professor being punished in some way. Everything from having their article removed to suspension, etc. About 1/5 of those result in professors being fired. So right now it's almost 200. It's around 190 professors being fired. So I want to give some context here. The Red Scare is generally considered to have been from 1947 to 1957. It ended, by the way, in 57 when it finally became clear, thanks to the First Amendment, that you couldn't actually fire people for their ideologies. Prior to that, a lot of universities thought they could. They were like, this guy is a very doctrinaire communist. They can't be dissuaded. I'm going to fire them. They thought they actually could do that. And it was only 57 when the law was established. So right now, these are happening in an environment where freedom of speech, academic freedom are clearly protected at public colleges in the United States. And we're still seeing these kind of numbers. During the Red Scare, the biggest study that was done of what was going on, I think this came out in 55, and the evaluation was that there was about 62 professors fired for being communists, and about 90-something professors fired for political views overall. That usually is reported as being about 100. So 60, 90, 100, depending on how you look at it. I think the number is actually higher, but that's only because of hindsight. What I mean by hindsight is we can look back and we actually find there were more professors who were fired as time reveals. We're at 190 professors fired, and I still have to put up with people saying this isn't even happening. And I'm like, in the 9.5 years of cancel culture, 190 professors fired. In the 11 years of the Red Scare, probably somewhere around 100, maybe probably more. The number is going to keep going up. But unlike during the Red Scare, where people could clearly tell something was happening, the craziest thing about cancel culture is I'm still dealing with people who are saying this isn't happening at all, and it hasn't been subtle on campus. And we know that's a wild undercount, by the way, because when we surveyed professors, 17% of them said that they had been threatened with investigation or actually investigated for what they taught, said, or their research. And 1/3 of them said that they were told by administrators not to take on controversial research. So, like, extrapolating that out, that's a huge number. And the reason why you're not going to hear about a lot of these cases is because there are so many different conformity-inducing mechanisms in the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why the idea that you'd add something like requiring a DEI statement to be hired or to get into a school under the current environment is so completely nuts. We have had a genuine crisis of academic freedom over the last, particularly since 2017 on campuses. We have very low viewpoint diversity to begin with. And under these circumstances, administrators just start saying, you know what the problem is? We have too much heterogeneous thought. We're not homogeneous enough. We actually need, we need another political litmus test, which is nuts. And that's what a DEI statement effectively is, because there's no way to actually fill out a DEI statement without someone evaluating you on your politics. It's crystal clear. We even did an experiment on this. Nate Honeycutt, he got something like almost like 3,000 professors to participate, evaluating different kinds of DEI statements. And one was basically like the standard kind of identity politics intersectionality one. One was about viewpoint diversity. One was about religious diversity. And one was about socioeconomic diversity. And as far as where my heart really is, it's that we have too little socioeconomic diversity, particularly in elite higher ed, but also in education, period. So the experiment had large participation, really interestingly set up, and it tried to model the way a lot of these DEI policies were actually implemented. And one of the ways these have been implemented, and I think in some of the California schools, is that administrators go through the DEI statements before anyone else looks at them, and then eliminates people off the top, depending on how they feel about their DEI statements. And the one on viewpoint diversity, I think like half of the people who reviewed it would eliminate it right out. And I think it was basically the same for religious diversity. It was slightly better, like 40% for socioeconomic diversity, but that kills me. Like the idea that kind of like, yeah, that actually is the kind of diversity that I think we need a great deal more of in higher education. You can agree with, it's not hostile to the other kinds, by the way. But the idea that we need more people from the bottom, 3/4 of American society, like in higher education, I think should be something we could all get around. But the only one that really succeeded was the one that spouted back exactly the kind of ideology that they thought the reviewers would like, which is like, okay, there's no way this couldn't be a political litmus test. We've proved that it's a political litmus test, and still school after school it is adding these to its application process to make schools still more ideologically homogenous.
Why does that have a negative effect? Is it because it enforces a kind of groupthink where people are afraid, start becoming afraid to sort of think and speak freely, liberally about whatever?
Well, one, it selects for people who tend to be, farther to the left, in a situation where you already have a situation where universities do lean decidedly that way. But it also establishes essentially a set of sacred ideas that if you're being quizzed on whether, what you've done to advance anti-racism, how you've been conscious of intersectionality, it's unlikely that you'd actually get in if you said, by the way, I actually think these are dubious concepts. I think they're thin. I think they're philosophically not very defensible. But basically, like if your position was, I actually reject these concepts as being oversimple, you're not going to get in. And I think that the person that I always think of that wasn't a right winger that would be like, go to hell if you made him fill one of these things out is Feynman. I feel like if you gave one of these things to Richard Feynman, he'd be like, he would tear it to pieces.
Yeah.
And then not get the job.
Yeah, there's some element of it that creates this hard to pin down fear. So you said like the thing I wanted to say is firing 100 people or 200 people. The point is, even firing one person, I've just seen it can create this quiet ripple effect of fear.
Oh, of course.
That single firing of a faculty
absolutely
has a ripple effect across tens of thousands of people, of educators, of who is hired, what kind of conversations are being had, what kind of textbooks are chosen, what kind of self-censorship and different flavors of that is happening. It's hard to measure that.
Yeah, I mean, when you ask professors about, are they intimidated under the current environment,
Yes.
the answer is yes, and particularly conservative professors, already, reporting that they're, afraid for their jobs in a lot of different cases.
You have a lot of good statistics in the book. Things like self-censorship. When provided with a definition of self-censorship, at least a quarter of students said they self-censor fairly often or very often during conversations with other students, with professors, and during classroom discussions. 25%, 27%, and 28% respectively. A quarter of students also said that they are more likely to self-censor on campus now at the time they were surveyed than they were when they first started college. So sort of college is kind of instilling this idea of censorship, self-censorship.
And back to the Red Scare comparison, and this is one of the interesting things about the data as well, is that same study that I was talking about, the most comprehensive study of the Red Scare, there was polling about whether or not professors were self-censoring due to the fear of the environment. And 9% of professors said that they were self-censoring their research and what they were saying. 9% is really bad. That's almost a tenth of professors saying that they were actually their speech was chilled. When we did this question for professors on our latest faculty survey, when you factor together we asked them, are they self-censoring in their research? Are they self-censoring in class? Are they self-censoring online, et cetera? It was 90% of professors. So the idea that we're actually in an environment that is historic in terms of like how scared people are actually of expressing controversial views, I think that it's the reason why we're going to actually be studying this in 50 years, the same way we study the Red Scare. It's not the idea that this isn't happening will just be correctly viewed as insane.